So this is going to be a little bit different than what you've seen prior. As they mentioned, I'm a social psychologist by training. I'm not a marketer. I'm actually a really terrible marketer when it comes down to it. So hopefully you'll get something out of this. At the very least, you'll have some fun before we get done with it today. So you got a great talk earlier by my friend Shira about some of the tactics of psych and how they sort of interrelate to the sort of tactical day-to-day work that you're doing. I want to up-level a little bit and talk about the process by which you work. So with a lofty title like Chief Behavioral Officer, as you might imagine, I'm slightly obsessed with behavior. And in fact, I believe everything that we do, everything we create, is for the purposes of changing people's behaviors, either others or our own, right? Engineers, designers, marketers, product people, whatever we do, it's all about behavior change, right? Even this talk is about behavior change, right? I will have failed if you go to work on Monday and do nothing differently, right? It is about getting you to do something differently. And yet, if you're willing to go along with me on that, we never really approach it that way. How often have you gone into like a campaign kickoff meeting and you're getting ready to do the design process and you sit down and you say, what behavior do we want out of people? And how are we going to get there? Now, people start throwing out ideas, we start scribbling them on a whiteboard, right? And you know, whatever the most senior white male says tends to be the idea that we go with, right? There's no process to that. That's not science. So let's talk about science. So how do scientists like me think about behavior change? So we often use something called the competing pressures model. What is a competing pressures model? It basically suggests that there's this big up arrow, which we call promoting pressures, and this big down arrow, which we call inhibiting pressures. And these two pressures fight on what behavior change is going to occur. So let's use one of my favorite canonical examples that some of you will have heard from me before, M&Ms. Why do we eat M&Ms? Because it's candy. Okay, what is it that makes, what is distinctive about candy? It tastes good, right? Tastes good. Taste is a powerful promoting pressure. And M&M's knows this, right? They've spent millions and millions and millions of dollars coming up with new flavors, which is ridiculous because we all know that the peanut butter M&M is the pinnacle to which M&M's can aspire. And they should have just stopped then, but they keep coming out with new ones. They're like Choco Nut and, you know, things you didn't even know were flavors are now an M&M, right? Why else do we eat M&Ms? Why besides flavor? How about color? Color actually matters. Being a psychologist, by the way, is mostly... PC, people are leaving. This is making me sad. It's M&Ms. You don't want to stay for the candy. They won't even look at me. They're like, you're not here, you're not here, you're not here. The last guy ran a little long. We're like, we got to go places. Okay, look. Color. Being a psychologist is basically about screwing with people for a living. So I actually know that if I give you a bowl of M&Ms that is just one color, you will eat fewer than if I give you the whole mix. Just take a step back and think about how ridiculous that is. It's not like it affects the flavor at all, and yet how many people in here have kids under the age of 10? Okay, how does every kid under the age of 10 eat M&Ms? Lines them up by color, eats them one at a time. They're like selecting the colors of M&Ms that have no flavor distance whatsoever. Everybody in this room are all reasonable adults. Well, some of us are reasonable, Sherry, maybe not so much, but most of us are reasonable adults, and yet we all have a favorite color of M&M, right? We know that we are being irrational, and yet still it matters to us. And they use this in their marketing. Now, I'm old enough to remember when there was like a beautiful chocolate brown color of M&M, and then there was a brown that, let's face it, was more of a poop brown color of M&M. And in my youth, they took away the poop brown color of M&M and it became, does anybody know? Blue! That's right, it became blue. And they ran a national marketing campaign where you could call in and vote for the new M&M color, and like 10 million people called in to vote for the color of a thing that does not matter. We got more people to vote for M&Ms than we did like senators. I have a quip that sometimes I show when I'm teaching psych students. It's like Dan Rather in sort of the 90s when this happened, early 2000s when this happened, and you know, he's like, and you know, 27 soldiers died in the Iraq War today. And in other news, the new M&M color is blue. Right? This made national headline news. So taste is one, color is one, why else? How about calories? Calories. Now people always look at me askance on this one, and I understand. I have a 2-year-old. I'm getting the dad belly thing going on. Like, calories seems like a reason not to eat something. But think about when M&M consumption peaks. Mid-afternoon. Your blood sugar's low, you eat lunch, your blood sugar spikes, glycemic index goes down, it bottoms out, people start eating M&Ms. It's an easy source of glucose. Think about Snickers. They lean into this marketing. You've never seen a Snickers ad that's like, Snickers, we taste better than M&Ms. Right? That's not how they advertise. Instead, they market using calories. Peanuts for power. Snickers satisfies. You're not yourself if you haven't had a Snickers. They leaned heavily into the term hangry. Right? They almost market it like it's like a power bar, right? And not candy. Now look around you. M&Ms are beautiful, they're delicious, they're caloric, and yet nobody's eating them. Why? None of the questions in my talk are rhetorical, by the way. Why are people not eating M&Ms right now? You don't have any! Availability is a strong inhibiting pressure. Right? It's an incredibly strong inhibiting pressure. I already told you being a psychologist is basically screwing with people for a living. I know if I put a bowl of candy on your desk versus as little as 6 feet away on a bookshelf, you will consume 5 to 6 times as much just because it's on your desk. Right? And think about that for a second. They're not any more delicious than they were before. They're not any more caloric than they were before. They're not any more beautiful than they were before. Just by lowering the inhibiting pressure, I have changed your behavior. Why else aren't people eating M&Ms? What else prevents people from eating M&Ms in the world? There's one easy one we all know. Yeah, you got it, say it. Money. They're not free. Now look, as adults, we're like, but they only cost $1. Sure, but when you're 5, $1 is a lot of money. Right? You're like saving your allowance for M&Ms, right? Cost is a big inhibiting factor, and it's one of those things where, if you're in the right industry and you're looking at something that's very cheap, it's very easy to gloss over that. But it actually can be tremendously powerful. A few years ago, I was involved in a campaign in New York around trying to get people to drink less full-sugared soda. You may be familiar with this. They were proposing essentially a soda ban. So full-sugared soda you could only sell in certain size containers. And I said, well, that's interesting, right? Because making people buy 2 containers in order to satisfy themselves is kind of an inhibiting pressure. But you know what else we could have done? Just add a little bit of a tax. If diet soda was 99 cents and full sugar soda was $1.05, there's a lot of people drinking diet soda because it's really easy to buy that with $1. Little tiny inhibiting pressures can change the behaviors of people, and we're going to come back to that. So, when I said I want you to do process differently, I literally want you on Monday to go into a room and draw a big giant up arrow and draw a big down arrow and map out the pressures for what you're trying to do. But before you can do that, you need to know what behavior you're trying to change. So I want you to write a behavioral statement. So what is a behavioral statement? Let's use another canonical example I use, and I just want to caveat this, like Travis is an asshole. Uber does this really well, so I'm going to use this as an example, but we should be abundantly clear, like if you know sexism is happening in your company and you don't do anything about it, you are a dick and deserve to be fired. Unfortunately, Uber's really good at what they do, right? So let's think about an Uber-like behavioral change statement. So a behavior statement has 3 parts. The first one is the seed sort of desire. Right? What is the organic motivation that causes people to want to do something? Why do people take an Uber? Remember, no rhetorical questions? Why do people take an Uber? They go somewhere. They want to go from point A to point B. So when people want to go from point A to point B, the next start of a behavioral statement is limitations. Does Uber care about everyone? Now, it's really easy, knee-jerk, as a marketer, to be like, yeah, Uber's for everybody. But is it? Does Uber want to drive people around like rural Oklahoma? Are they like, yeah, you live 3 miles away from the nearest city, whee, right? That's not their business model. What else do you need? You need a smartphone, right? Now, at this point, lots and lots of people have smartphone and connectivity, maybe, although data shows us that it's not as many as we might hope. But let's take a third one that nobody really thinks about. You have to have an electronic form of payment. There is a good 20% of the United States that does not believe in banking. They are underbanked or unbanked. They do not have an electronic form of payment. They literally cannot take Uber, Lyft, or any other system because they cannot pay for them, because you cannot pay for them in cash, and they only are willing to pay in cash. This, by the way, I think is one of Uber's strongest, sort of claims, right? It wasn't about, making transportation more interesting. It was about removing the inhibiting pressure that was payment. This is what Amazon is now piggybacking on as they make it so that you can walk out of a grocery store without paying, right? Paying is just a strong inhibiting pressure. So, when people want to go from point A to point B, and they live in a city, have a smartphone, and an electronic form of payment, the last piece is just the behavior you want to see. They will take an Uber. By the way, notice that I'm not saying they might take an Uber, or sometimes they'll take an Uber. Make it absolute. Let's shoot for 100% market share. When they want to go from point A to point B and they meet the requirements, they will take an Uber. So, Monday morning, you go in, you write this statement, you get in a room with a whiteboard, you write this statement on, you get a promoting pressure arrow and an inhibiting pressure arrow. I'll do another example of promoting and inhibiting pressures with Uber just to sort of make it easier, right? Why Uber was so incredibly successful is because they focused on inhibiting pressures, right? So one of the things I want you to take away from today is that inhibiting pressures are probably untapped space for you. What do I mean by that? Well, if you think about when Uber started, they were in the black car space. And if you looked at what else was going on in the black car space at the time, it was mostly about what you would think of as promoting pressures. It's not going to be a black car. It's going to be a silver Audi driven by a supermodel with a disco ball and a wine bar. And, it's going to play your music directly from Spotify as you enter the car, right? None of that matters. Why? Because I want to go from point A to point B. That's really all I care about. That's the whole point. So what did Uber do? They relentlessly focused on removing inhibiting pressures like payment. They also, by the way, do this in their marketing. Go back and look at your Uber marketing emails. Every once in a while, they'll do a promoting pressure email. Today it comes with puppies, right? Today it has ice cream. But that's rare. You know what the majority of their email marketing is? It is now cheaper than it ever was before. We now have more drivers so you won't have to wait, right? An inhibiting pressure. Or we can go someplace we couldn't go before. The airport wouldn't let us go there, now we can go there. One of the great untapped things for most of your businesses is to focus on inhibiting pressures. And there's a reason for that. Everybody in this room is locked in a death struggle with each other, right? Because, I don't know about you, I'm not getting any smarter. I don't get any more minutes in the day. I have a 2-year-old, I get less minutes in the day, right? I have more demands on my attention. And yet, how do we conventionally market? We conventionally market by trying to take more of people's attention. So there's a limited resource, right? The pie graph that is my brain, and all of you are competing for more attention. That's literally how most businesses look at it. Look at the metrics we use, time on page, and we want that to go up. But why? Why do we want that to go up? Yes, it indicates engagement, it indicates promoting pressure. But if you're not delivering new value, you're diluting this sort of ROI equation that I have in my brain, which is how much time do I have to spend to get a particular kind of return, right? There's time, there's mental energy in, and then there's some sort of return out. And so if you look at companies that are very successful right now, part of what they are doing is saying, I'm going to give you exactly the same value that you used to get from another service, I'm just going to make it so you don't have to worry about it. And this is incredibly, incredibly important. This same sort of promoting and inhibiting pressure, by the way, can be used for anybody here in the room who's working on eliminating behaviors, right? Think about smoking. Smoking is one of the great public health stories of the United States and potentially the world. We go from a point in the sort of mid-50s where basically everybody smokes to a point now where very few, 1 in 10 adult Americans smokes. What was responsible for this massive change? Well, they started with the predictable side. They said, we're going to make them really expensive. If you live in New York City, the taxes on a pack of cigarettes are more expensive than the cigarettes themselves. Eric Garner, who was choked out by the police, tragically, you know what his crime was? He was selling loosies. He was literally going in, buying a pack of cigarettes, and then reselling them one at a time to people who did not have enough money to buy a $15 pack of cigarettes. That was his crime, right? Taxes is incredibly, incredibly good at getting people to stop doing things. We did other things. Why else? What else did we do to make it really clear that inhibiting pressures on smoking? Come on, there's some. You can't do it in restaurants. You can't. Right? We restricted locations. We said you can't do it here. Availability. We put a giant label on the pack that says, by the way, this will kill you. Just are we all clear? Just could you? So you know. We did really graphic ad campaigns were like, look at this lung, this will kill you. We have people smoking out of their stomas. They're like, oh, this will kill you, right? And that was part of how we beat it. But it was only half the equation. Think about the fact that we banned advertising for smoking, right? Why do most young people start smoking? Because they think it looks cool, because they think it will make them cool, because cigarette companies spent literally billions of dollars convincing them that doing it would make them look cool. So in one fell swoop, with one fell law, it's actually several laws, we said, we're just going to remove your ability to make it look cool in the first place. You can't advertise on TV, you can't advertise in magazines, you can't advertise in movies. This image always just kind of cracks me up a little bit. It's one of the few laws we have in the United States about cartoon characters. A bunch of amazing, like, adult, serious senator people are, like, sitting around being like, yeah. And they wrote a law that said you cannot sell cigarettes using cartoon characters. Goodbye, Joe Camel. And that was incredibly effective, because they removed the reason that people did it in the first place. So, one of the things you're going to do on Monday is write a behavioral statement. Then you're going to draw some arrows. A third thing is to recognize your own biases. So what do I mean by that? When we say, I want people to do something more, we automatically default to promoting pressures. And when we say, I want people to do something less, we automatically default to inhibiting pressures. So what does that imply? That for the majority of us, the opportunity is on the flip side of the arrow from where we normally are. So if you are in the business of trying to get people to stop doing something, like running anti-smoking campaigns, or like me in public health, try thinking about why they do it in the first place, and short-circuit that. If you are in the business of getting people to do something more, instead of spending all your time thinking about, how do I just push them, give them new reasons, sit there and step back and say, okay, what can we do to remove the inhibiting pressures that prevent them from taking action on their natural desires? How is this feeling so far? I know it's the end of the day, we're tired and this is hard, and like, we good? Nodding, yes, no, maybe, okay. We're nodding. She's nodding vigorously, that helps me. Vigorous nodding, okay. How are we doing on time? Timekeeper. Okay, 15 minutes. All right, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk a little more. I'm going to take some questions. And then at the end, I'm going to try and squeeze in an entire other talk in about 2 minutes to at least get you sort of started on something more to talk about on when you go into work on Monday. So, a couple of things. You wrote a behavior statement. You're going to draw the arrows. You're thinking about the flip side of the arrow from where you normally do. You've thought about the fact that, hey, people are busy. How can I reduce the number of times? And by the way, you've aligned your metrics to this. I'm a scientist. I love data. I'm fanatical about data, but I'm fanatical about the right data. Don't just make up metrics, right? Time on site is only a good metric if the behavior that you want requires a bunch of time on site, right? Otherwise, try and eliminate that. Try and get to the metrics that are most helpful to measure the actual behavior change that you want. One more note on process. So, she was talking earlier about some psych biases. One of the psych biases that happens is something called confirmation bias. We're all very familiar with confirmation bias because it happens to every one of us, which is the moment I suggest something, I then want to defend that suggestion against all the rest of you motherfuckers, right? My thing on the board is mine, and I'm going to try and make sure it becomes the thing that we do, and that's how the meeting is run. We all just compete for who comes up with the craziest, coolest idea, and that's how we get bonuses and do shiny things like that. The problem is that generally leads us in very bad, wrong, astray directions. So, how do we prevent that? When you go draw your promoting and inhibiting pressure arrows, I want you not to start generating interventions. So what do I mean by that? There is a difference between saying cost is a factor that affects whether people do this. Cost is an inhibiting pressure. And saying, well, we should do coupons, we should run a sale, we should, right? Those second things are interventions. The first thing is a pressure. Only map the pressures first. You want to put off intervention design as long as you can, because otherwise your biases will start to kick in and you'll start indexing over much on the thing that you think is a hot, sexy, interesting thing to do. So by staying relentlessly focused as long as you can on the pressures, you can actually get a lot farther before people's biases kick in. So I would love for you not even to do interventions in that first meeting. I actually think the result of the first meeting should just be a pressure map that you then go out and validate. So meaning, hey, we've brainstormed all of the things that we think make people do this and all the things that we think prevent people from do this, and then we're going to get out into the world and we're going to start sitting in bars talking to people about, like, why do you smoke? When did you start smoking? Tell me the story of your smoking. And start to listen for, hey, did they give me evidence that tells me that these are the wrong pressures, the right pressures, the near things, the far things? And when you've done that work, then come back together and say, hey, we should design some interventions. There's one other benefit to this that I want to highlight to you, which is we talked a lot today about test, right? It's really important to test what you're doing. So the thing that moves a test from an experiment is tests don't actually increase your knowledge. All they do is tell you which of two options is better, right? I can test this red button versus this blue button, right? 50% of you get the blue button, 50% of you get the red button, and we see which one increases conversion. Great, what about the green button? Right? Nothing about this test told me anything about the green button. A good experiment tells me it's blue because, it's red because. And that's what mapping pressures leads you to be able to do. So imagine, for example, that you figure out, hey, cost is a pressure. And you say, I'm going to run a couponing campaign, and it doesn't work. The beauty of doing things this way is that you now can systematically look and say, okay, couponing as an intervention did not work. Now, that may mean that price is not a real pressure, but it could just mean that wasn't the right intervention. So I can keep the pressures that I have and run another intervention against them and see, oh, I did coupons. Wait, sorry, I did coupons the first time. I did a sale. Well, that didn't work either. Okay, well now I'm starting to have some converging evidence that that pressure is weak, right? I'm starting to test the because, right? So I'm not just running campaign after campaign after campaign blindly against each other. I'm starting to understand what is the underlying principles so that when new information comes in, when something changes, I can reincorporate it. That is how we start to move to science. I will give you this free tip. If you are struggling with this, if you didn't come from a science background, you probably all live near at least one academic higher education place. Don't go back to school, steal a grad student. Right? Take them out to lunch. Amounts of money that your company think of as trivial for, like, hiring a researcher or a consultant, like $100 to a grad student, and they'll tell you everything they know. Right? If you walk in with a $100 bill and be like, I'll give you $100 to stay here for 2 hours and tell me about what you're already excited about, they'll be like, great, sold, done. Take some paper. Right? So find the people who know about what you're doing and use them as your experts. So I have a couple of minutes left, I think. So what I'm going to do is try and take as many questions as I can, and if we run out of questions, I'll just ramble on about another topic that I think is interesting. How's that feel? By the way, before we do questions, can we all give Sherry a good round of applause? It was a great talk about psych and made my job a lot easier.
If you've got a question, keep your hand up. I'm going to try to get to everybody, so go ahead and raise your hands and I'll start. Raise your hands.
While you're thinking about your questions, you raise your hands, he'll run to you, I'll tell more stories. So let's talk about other places where we've done competing pressures for behavior change. Wow, I've done a lot of projects over the years. Let's take a feminist one, since I'm on a feminist kick today because I'm angry. I'm actually always angry about feminism, but I'm particularly angry today. We did a thing called Get Raised. So I love Lean In. I think it's a great book. I love Cheryl. She's my friend. She's awesome. But do we seriously think the problem is that women don't want it enough? Right? Is it a promoting pressure problem? So I got kind of obsessed with the idea that, hey, there's this 30%, and when I say 30%, it varies widely. It's less for white women. It's considerably larger for Hispanic women, for example. But let's round it to 30%. There's a 30% pay gap that exists in the world for women. Which, by the way, is complete bullshit. It's just ridiculous that this is a real thing. So I got really obsessed with how could we close that. And everything else that had been done in the space focused on promoting pressures. It was the latest campaign that said, hey, you women, you should want to ask. Hey, you, women in the room, how many people don't want to raise? Anybody? Oh, look at those hands fly up. Look at that. So what did we do? We built Get Raised. What is Get Raised? It's like a Mad Lib. We talked earlier about like AI generating content. This is basically like calculators generating content. You come in, you answer a few questions. I'll tell you if you're underpaid. You answer a few more questions. I'll generate a letter that you can give to your boss asking for a raise. It's basically a template letter that your questions provided the information that we then plug in. This letter, by the way, it's a free tool. This letter takes about 7 to 8 minutes to generate. 70% of the women that hand it in get a raise. The average raise is about $8,000 to help women earn $2.3 billion, with a B, dollars in about 4 years. And the only reason it worked is because instead of trying to do what everyone had done before, which is say, promoting pressure, promoting pressure, we just built something that removed the inhibiting pressure to doing what you already wanted to do. And I guarantee if you go into work on Monday, you will find there are tons of things in your business that people already want to do that you are blocking them and do not realize. I love all of the content that's supposed to make people want something. How about you give me an instruction manual instead? An instruction manual that's entertaining that I might actually want to read. A how-to about how to use it in an interesting and new way that somebody in the world wants to already do. You're standing back there, that means there's a question. Go.
Whoa, look at that.
The power of science knocking people over.
Can you talk a little bit more about the behavioral statements, just the logistics of how we actually write that, what goes in it?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So remember, it's 3 parts, right? The first one is sort of a core motivation that you're not going to touch. And what I mean by that is like, Uber could conceivably have decided that they wanted to be a company that made you want to go from point A to point B, right? That's a reasonable version of a company. There are companies that do that in the world. It's really about putting a stake in the ground and saying, this is where we are picking up the ball, right? And the middle is about limitations. Who are we going to address, right? We often say we're for everyone. You're almost never for everyone, right? Unless you're truly for like a 0-year-old just came out of the womb, and like somebody on their deathbed, you're not for everybody. Figure out who you're for, and be realistic about that. Write that into your limitations. And so if you use the metaphor sort of like where are you picking up the ball to generate the first part, the limitations to be about the journey in between, who we're picking up the ball for, the last sentence is just about where we're dropping off the ball, meaning they will take an Uber, right? Okay, that's it. Once they've taken the Uber, we're done, right? Once you get out of our car, right, it's the next person's thing. Writing a behavioral statement, by the way, is incredibly, incredibly key because it tells you about interesting partnerships you can do and interesting competitive things that you haven't noticed. Like, for example, I will suggest to you that Netflix and Uber are locked in a death battle. What do I mean by that? What does Uber want you to do on Friday night? Go out! And in particular, go out and get drunk, right? So you can't drive home. What does Netflix want you to do on a Friday night? Stay in! Right? So by writing out their behavioral statements, right, when people want to stay in and be entertained, when people want to go out, when people want to go to point A to point B, they can go, oh, not my friends, right? People I'm going to compete against. It also, however, can suggest unusual partnerships. Right? If you're Netflix and you figure out, hey, my job is to make people stay in, well, who else wants people to stay in? Domino's Pizza wants people to stay in. Grubhub wants people to stay in. Who can I start looking? Couches, Snuggies, like what else can, like, come on. Netflix and Snuggie never did a thing. Come on. Like that was a natural partnership waiting to happen. Right? Where is the Netflix branded blanket that I get for being a 5-year member? Right? We laugh, but that is a really good gift that actually syncs with their that is in line with their behavioral motivation. I actually, I won't say what company this was, but I was laughing because they gave away coffee mug swag. Right? Their swag was very traditionally, like many other people, a sort of coffee mug, but not like a travel coffee mug, but like a sit on your desk coffee mug. Anybody want to guess what the company did? I was like, thanks guys, here's a gift, all about sitting at my desk, where I'm not doing the thing you want me to do. Yay! Like, well done. So it can guide, like, get radical. Think about how your behavioral goals guide everything from swag selection to what you do in advertising, from how you design your product. And I think, like, marketing is a real chance to go work with product design on, hey, what are the inhibiting pressures? Why do our people use our stuff? What is the core of this? Because I'll tell you right now, product doesn't have that as a competency, right? Like, that's not in there. They don't have as many opportunities as you do to interact with your users. And they don't get to test things often at scale. You are the mechanism to do that. So if you're not working with your product team and the people who actually control what you design and build, right, you're missing a huge opportunity to help them inform, hey, what behavior are we actually trying to do and what can we do to change that behavior together, right? Because the best products, the ones that really work, are the ones where the marketing and the product are really, really tightly aligned. So one of the reasons to write a behavioral statement is just to help understand, hey, who else in the ecosystem is aligned? It also, by the way, can tell you where you might need to change your product in order to fit in the ecosystem. So it's not actually true at this particular moment that Uber and Netflix are in a death battle. Why? Because Uber made a key pivot. I said their goal was to get people to go from point A to point B. But what are their new product lines mostly focused on? They took out the word people and they said something. Could be food, could be a package, could be your groceries. And they just keep sticking new things in there, right, in that sentence. And what did that mean? Suddenly Netflix and Uber could be friends. Because Uber is the one delivering your pizza. It also happens the other way. Netflix went from a company that 5 years ago was exclusively focused on getting you to sit on your couch on Friday night. 10 years ago, when it was DVDs, even more so. But as they moved into a streaming era, and they moved streaming onto mobile, right? One of the other speakers and I were talking about, what's the name of the Instagram with the bored husbands? Miserable Men. There's apparently an Instagram with miserable men. It's just pictures of men shopping, essentially with their wives being really bored and sitting there and looking at their phones and things and looking really sad while shopping. It's a very gendered stereotype, but it's funny. So one of the other speakers was like, I actually don't care because of Netflix, right? Now I just sit there and I like binge watch a Netflix show until we're done. Netflix has moved out of the home, Uber has moved into the home, right? They changed their behavioral statements by recognizing what was going on in the market. But they only could do that because they were explicit on what behaviors were the existing state of the world. They were conscious about that change and conscientious about that change. And how do I know? Because I talked to both companies. So try and get really religious about writing a behavioral statement and sticking to it and make sure everybody knows it. It should be on the wall at your company, right? Now, they're of different sizes. A campaign may have a different behavioral statement, maybe a much smaller behavior, right? We want to think about how do we get people to actually get the ID card that they need to go to the gym, as opposed to the much larger goal that is getting people to go to the gym, right? They may be smaller behavioral statements embedded, but your company all up has something it is trying to get people to do, and it's worth making sure everybody at the company is aligned around that, especially because it's a great litmus test, right? When you look at an intervention that someone proposes, hey, I want to do blank, you can say, well, do we think it actually accomplishes our behavior? And if it doesn't, and if you can't chart me a clear path from what you want to do to our behavior, we're not doing it, right? But you can't do that unless you are incredibly explicit about the behavior you're actually trying to create. One question, I can ramble on for 20 minutes, it's amazing. I know we're all ready to go to Barcade and drink and things. Are there other questions? If not, anybody? Thank you so much for taking some time with me. I really appreciate it. I'll see you guys later, guys.